The Parashat Kitavo, opens with the mitzvah, the great mitzvah of Bikurim, of the first fruits. And when the Israelites are to enter the land, the mitzvah was to bring the first fruits of their harvest before the priest and then recite the famous phrase or the famous ritual that we recite at the Pesach Seder, Arami Oved Avi. My father was a fugitive Aramean. Sound familiar? This is in this week's parasha. He went down to Mitzrayim with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. And then it continues and it says, Vanitzak el Adonai Elohei Avotenu, Vayishma Adonai et kolenu, Vayar et onyenu. We heard the cries. Ve'et zamalenu, ve'et lachatzenu. We cried out, or we screamed out to God, the God of our ancestors, and God heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. And you can hear in the words, our plight, our misery, and oppression, that on the one hand, those could be considered as synonyms. They're repetitive. And so a lot of the commentators have to figure out what's the unique expression of each and every word in the Torah, because each and every word for the rabbis was of divine import, and then nothing was repetitive in the Torah. So I want to share with you the way that the Ha'emek Hadavar, the Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who lived in the 19th century, and he takes the verses to express the intensity of their cries. And so he says, Vayishma et kolenu, that God accepted our prayer or heard our prayer. He said they merited to have their prayers accepted even though they had no words, but simply cried out from the depths of their heart. Vayar et onyenu, and understood or saw their oppression. God saw even those things which they were embarrassed to cry out about. One of which he says was that they were so oppressed that they didn't want to conceive. That couples didn't want to have relationships, to have children. That's how in despair they were. Ve'et amalenu, and our labor, our toil. This refers to the children who 80 years prior had been thrown into the river based on Pharaoh's decree, which they had already forgotten to cry out about anymore. So the specificity of that toil was that they had forgotten the pain that had happened earlier. Ve'et lachatzenu, the pressure. This is the confinement, he says. For Paro confined them to live in very small homes, and all this caused the people to be depressed and to lack hope, and to remove the ambition and pride of the Israelites. And Paro did all of this to humiliate the people. It's a very painful verse about the story of our ancestors in Mitzrayim and the uniqueness of each word of all of their toils. The Sloner Rebbe teaches that when the Israelites were in Mitzrayim, the world of speech was closed to them. They didn't have the koach of the word. They didn't have the strength of the word. And the only way that they could turn to the Holy One was through crying out. That was their only vehicle. And as we understood, they cried out because they were embarrassed for all they couldn't be. They wept for all the traumas that they had experienced and suppressed and had forgotten to cry about. And they wailed in their despair, their shame, for in a certain sense their inability to know just how brutal a world they were living in. am not sure that any of us have the words to adequately describe the moment we are living in. The fear, the rage, the despair, and the hatred in this country. Hostages crying out from the tunnels of Gaza but never responded to. An ongoing war that has caused unimaginable suffering, and a world with so much callousness and pain. More and more people are choosing to use guns and violence to express their rage and despair, as opposed to crying out for all that has been lost. What have we come to? What have we come to? It is the cry, the tza'aka, the shriek of despair, teaches the Slonemer, that was and can be, he says, the beginning of redemption. It's in the very crying out, he says, that that's when redemption started. And he teaches in the parasha, in his teaching on this week, the Slonemer was a 20th century Hasidic Rabbi that lived primarily most of his life in Yerushalayim, because he knows that we're about to enter Rosh Hashanah. He says the shofar is that that is the cry. He writes that when a Jew stands before God on Rosh Hashanah and we don't know what to say or what to ask for, and we can't find the strength to lift our heads, the shofar is our voice, our plea from the bottom of our hearts to be heard. It is the cry that only God understands. I invite us on this Shabbat, after a very disturbing, painful, horrific week, one it seems that we've been in week after week after week after week. This is the Shabbat right before Slichot, tomorrow night, on the precipice of 5786. To not try to explain this moment away, to not become a pundit on our world, but to sit in it, and cry for the world that is before us, and all our wounds, and all our rage, and our responsibility in it and for it. It is the prayer from that deepest place that might beckon us to a new story, to return, to repent, and please God, to be heard, to usher in the dawn of redemption. Shabbat Shalom.